Good evening, everyone. Happy to have you here. Sorry about not getting the video out to you yet. Both Amanda and I have been on the road for 2 weeks, and so just haven't had a chance to get that out for you, but at least I got the readings out, so yay me. Anyways, Amanda, I'm going to turn it over to you. This is a really interesting topic that I certainly didn't know anything about, so I was very interested to read it, and I have a whole bunch of questions to prompt discussion tonight. So I'll turn it over to you, and you can get started.
Thank you. And yes, thanks to all of you for your patience this time. And I know that many of you will be patient with it because I was seeing you on the road. So many of you I was able to either meet in person for the first time with or reconnect with and have reunions during this time on Vancouver Island. The past 10 days, I gave more than 22 presentations, or there were about 22 presentations, and then a lot of one-to-one meetings as well, visits at Catholic Healthcare schools, grade 7 students, grade 12, and a dozen parishes. So thankful for that and grateful to be with all of you again and shout out to Judith, who just gave me a thumbs up. She's on the Diocesan Healthcare Committee, and they are rock stars who coordinated this tour of hope on the island and were able to make everything possible. And it was incredible to be hosted and to receive the hospitality of so many tremendous people during this time. So, shout out, Judith. Thank you, especially to you. And yeah, welcome everyone. And this is a really meaningful occasion to look at a minority that's often overlooked or not even really studied as the victims that they were during this period under National Socialism. And they had a unique experience, the Roma and the Sinti people who deserve a unique commemoration. There's often a kind of controversy about whether their victimization is part of the Holocaust. And I do think that it's important to reserve the term Holocaust and Holocaust victims uniquely to the Jewish victims, but nevertheless, the Roma and Sinti are victims of National Socialism, and they have been recognized as such, and that recognition continues to unfold even in the recent years and decades, as you saw a little bit with the story of Johann Trollmann. And you see, we've taken a few excerpts simply from a Swedish Holocaust Museum webpage to put this demographic on your radar, but then humanized it and individualized it with a face and a name. And again, uh, that way of looking at it and that way of doing Holocaust education is also with reference to Yad Vashem. I will give you a name, a place and a name is the verse from Isaiah from which the name Yad Vashem, the name of the World Holocaust Center and main Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem, is taken. So I learned a little bit about this minority when I was traveling, first of all, on the March of Remembrance and Hope Holocaust study trip to which I've alluded on previous sessions. And the main way I guess I first heard about them was with the distinct kind of triangles. Maybe you've seen those various colored triangles with which prisoners were tagged and labeled. And so then there were different colors to sort different people who were dehumanized by the Nazis. And also along the way, visiting many, many Holocaust museums, maybe if you have the chance to see the Nuremberg race law tables that existed, you can also see how the pseudoscience of racial ideology played into the dehumanization of this ethnic minority that has an intricate history and origin story that kind of baffled the Nazis in their simplistic and reductive endeavor to have a pure race, whatever that was going to mean. I remember more recently this past summer on the Holocaust study trip, having passed so many monuments and memorials, and there could be a whole course on the commemoration and memorials. Maybe that would be an interesting thing to look at. But there are certainly a lot of different memorials, and they're never without their controversy. And in Berlin, the memorial for the Roma is very nondescript. And if you didn't have the panels alongside and outside it that have been added recently to put faces and names, it would seem, I think, really, really inadequate because basically there's a memorial pool. Um, and you can pull this up if you want to look at it. If you type in Roma Memorial Berlin, you can see it's a memorial pool that is a dark circular pool of water with the triangle stone in the center, which is alluding to those ways of being marked. And so it's not particularly an expression of Roma identity from within, but more from uh, outside by the perpetrator. But there's the triangular stone in the center, and then there's a fresh flowers placed each day at the center of this memorial. And there are these brown letters at the edge of this pool featuring the very short poem titled Auschwitz that was written by a Roma poet. And the poem is very simply gaunt face, dead eyes, cold lips, quiet, a broken heart, out of breath, without words, no tears. And for years, that's all people would see. And if they didn't understand the poem or if they didn't understand what this place was commemorating, I think really being at a loss. But now they've since added these panels that have a few video testimonies, photos, and bios to give some voice to the unique situation of this population. And what I specifically wanted to draw out as we consider ethics is, first of all, the reduction and the pseudoscience of that racial ideology that drew largely on stereotypes and the emerging science of genetics. We know that people were sterilized and euthanized and also murdered in the concentration camps, and that all of this pseudoscience was largely a part of the justification to try and have a purported rationality to discarding life that was seen as unworthy of life and human beings who were regarded as subhuman. So it's also striking to read about how many of these prisoners in early on, or prisoners, victims really, had been sent to Dachau. Minorities were seen as a threat to the homogenous German life. And um, there was also this asocial category, and I came across that a lot when I was at the former euthanasia museums, the 4 out of 6 former Nazi euthanasia memorial museums that I visited. These bizarre criteria that qualified people to be euthanized, names like asocial or congenital feeble-mindedness, and that last term came up in the story of Johann Trollmann as a sort of justification for his sterilization, and how tragic that this man who grew up as one of 9 and then ends up being sterilized with all of this horrible dehumanization he suffered as an athlete and more simply as a human being. So, what I specifically want to draw our attention to, though, is the unique form of resistance of an ultra minority that is so powerless, even for all of the ways Jews were victimized. Many of the Jews within the German society had been um, had their place within German society, whereas um, there was definitely this entrenched anti-Gypsyism that we kind of read about, and a real sort of bottom of the social hierarchy for this minority, and ultimately so peripheral. And so what I think is interesting is how does a group of people that is so peripheral and so struck down and so defeated by circumstances and social exclusion resist under National Socialism. And so we have a few different instances of the kinds of expressions that this resistance took. We have the uprising in Auschwitz, where the prisoners had some sense of their dignity, some semblance of their capacity to rise up against the perpetrators. And so it's described that with simple improvised weapons, they rose up and it was just to try and forestall death, and maybe their deaths were different than they would have been otherwise. It's hard to say exactly, but it was clear that they were not going to go and be killed without a fight and without demonstrating their yeah, that they would put up a fight. Then there's that Pole who stole the register books containing the names from the Roma section. And it's interesting to think about how little with a population um, of that's this peripheral and with these lifestyles and history, that the documentation rarely, whenever it would happen, would be a form of resistance. Just to have their names commemorated, that as they maybe could say, well, we really existed, and here's the evidence and the proof of the community and of the loss. But I think the most interesting of all of these examples that really struck me was when I was in the German Resistance Memorial Museum, and I learned this story of Johann Trollmann, who was referred to as Rukeli, which means tree in the Roman language, and he was a boxer. And so you have the short profile about him, and when he faced such radical exclusion as a boxer and knew that he simply could not win, even if he was the best athlete, but that he was regarded as the gypsy in the ring and that he was taunted and that he was degraded despite his clear talent, um, that he really had the only um, mere ability to resist through mockery and satire of his tormentors. And so he put this he powdered his face with flour, and he dyed his hair to be a caricature of an Aryan boxer. And then he just took it when he knew that there was no way he could win and that it was a defeat before he could throw a first punch. And I just think this is like a really interesting example because throughout this course, we're looking at examples great and small, and by people from those who wield positions of great influence and authority to those who are so subjugated that they have just an ounce of capacity left, and what do they do with that? So I think that's why I wanted to include him, not only to highlight this minority group that is often overlooked, and so to include them this way, but also to say, what is the value of satire or of mockery or of kind of derision of the status quo and of inhuman policies? What place is there for that in the resistance? Is there a certain virtue to that, or is it not particularly virtuous to act in that way? How would you regard his actions? And what do you think about the commemoration that gradually, step by step, came to him and his family in terms of him being awarded the championship, but almost a century later, and the park commemorating him and things like this? What kind of vindication is it for those who have been so subjugated in the past? And what is there in these stories of resistance for us today? Because there are very few kind of known examples of these victims who were among this population, but I think his story is a good one because people want in every community to have heroes and exemplars who are their own. And so, with all of that, I really look forward to our discussion about this unique model of resistance that is quite peculiar and I think quite interesting. So, there's our start.
So just before we let anyone else speak, I want to ask you a question because you said something and I want to just you to explain it. So you said you're going to reserve the word Holocaust for the Jews.
Mhm.
Why?
Because
Why does it not like for the Poles, the Slavs, the Romas who were exterminated as well?
Because there is a uniqueness to the Jewish tragedy, and there was a deliberate targeting by the Nazis. And I think each victim group needs to be commemorated in their uniqueness. And if they're all grouped together, then it diminishes the uniqueness and the Jewish particularity. Jews were uniquely and in a big way, singularly targeted for being Jews. And so Yeah, I think that also with reference to the victim, it's important to clarify that. So, for example, the Rwandan genocide is usually called just that, the Rwandan genocide, but increasingly there's an effort to instead talk about to talk about the genocide against Tutsi. And so Tutsi were like they were the minority group, but they were the majority victim group. And if everyone within the society who is victimized or dehumanized is kind of grouped together, then there isn't a distinction of victim and perpetrator. And so I think there is a real value to segmenting out the demographics who have been victimized. And yeah, it's the term Holocaust was coined to speak of the specific Jewish tragedy. So if retrospectively all the other groups get lumped in, then that seems to diminish the commemoration that was specifically created by that term being coined for that purpose.
Okay, great, thank you. The other thing that I thought was interesting, and that was one of the questions that I had, was when he made himself, like, covered himself with flour and put dye in his hair, about the role that satire plays in, like, you always speak truth to power and stuff like that, right? It's a common saying, but is not humor or satire or making poking at the inconsistencies in someone's position through laughter the most effective way of maybe standing up against them?
And a way of preserving dignity, kind of saying that, like, you will not have this power over me. You
Yeah.
can taunt and torment, but eventually I am free. And there's a great freedom in being able um, to joke in that way.
Yes. Okay, now that I've gotten my questions out of the way, I'm happy to open the floor to other people if they have comments or thoughts. And if there's something that struck them about either about Rukeli or about the story as a whole.
Also, sorry to you guys for some of the repeated text in the website material. I was working very quickly to pull that together amidst the whirlwind of activities. So I know there's some sections that were kind of repetitive, but I was collating from a lot of web pages. So I hope you can overlook that and consider it reinforcement of historical facts with which we could all do well to um, go over and over.
So the one thing that I wondered, and I want to put this out there for people to maybe speak about, is the fact that he was a sports hero. Did that make him more of an icon or more of a figure that stood out? And I think actually just right now, tonight, I was just thinking about the Iranian women's soccer team and what they're going through, and if that pulls at people's heartstrings or makes them, I don't know, just draws your attention to them more because they are a sports hero. And what does that say?
I think that's a really good point and a really good analogy because it kind of becomes relatable even if you're not particularly interested in that sport or good at that sport. It's a lot more distinctive and it's kind of like the pool of the kind of pool of water memorial versus the photos. You just immediately connect more with a photo um, than you do with a kind of abstract notion or with a symbol. And so, yeah, I think anything that kind of um, creates the effect of you're like me or I'm like you is a help to that humanization.
Yeah. Hi, Greg. You had your
Hi.
hand up, so I pulled you in. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was very interesting to read Rukeli's like how he was so gifted with boxing and that actually our style of boxing may have actually originated from his style. That's very interesting. And um I do think that his ability certainly allowed him a certain amount of freedom, I think, to be able to do some of the things that he was able to do. Um, I wonder if that was part of it. And those of us who have like everything to like, not that we have, it's more that he had risen to a certain level and he really didn't have anything to lose to do what he was doing. Um, and if I was just a regular guy, I may not have made those moves to be so open and to make like a public display of what happens, like dyeing your hair white or powdering your face. So that I think that's quite a thing that he was able to do.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting, just how he stood up and um, and also stood up for his people. The other thing that thought was interesting too is how he divorced his wife so that she would be able to be safe from the persecution that he was facing, and for his daughter as well. That kind of sacrifice. It seemed a lot of his life seemed very sacrificial. The way he approached it, like just standing there, being punched till he was knocked out, not even trying to fight. Like all of that was quite outstanding.
Yeah, it's almost like he made a
Uh,
statement. Like in that fight, he just took the blows and he just took it, and he was knocked out in the fifth round. Um, and even in the camp before his death, I mean, he he could have said no, I won't fight you, but he rose to the challenge and actually beat that fellow. That's I can't imagine what condition he was in when he had to fight.
yeah, that's quite amazing. The other thing that I was going to ask about, which I thought was interesting, and maybe Amanda, you can speak to this more broadly because you have better knowledge on all of this, is the fact that they went down fighting, right? That they tried to fight back. And I don't know how common that was in the concentration camps. Like it was in the ghettos, maybe where there was a little bit more freedom to organize, but in the concentration camps, I don't, was that common or was this
There,
really unusual?
it was always risky, obviously, and but it did happen on other occasions. It happened sometimes during a roll call when people were freezing in the cold at a roll call, or when people were being, yeah, even death marched. Like there were times of resistance, and there were times where people thought, even if I'm killed in the act of doing this, I'll preserve my dignity by demonstrating that I'm not just going to take it. So there were some examples. Usually, though, people were killed um, after demonstrating in this way. So it was costly, but yeah, definitely individual acts and some collective acts of resistance like that across victim groups. But yeah, you can see the coordination required too among to not be the only one doing that, and to have makeshift weapons. Like you can know that the prisoners were strategizing among themselves and looking for whatever they could find and choosing the time, having thought about who would be on guard and all these calculations and all of this kind of cooperation among the prisoners.
Right? And somebody who was a leader, right? That would can encourage them to take
Yeah.
that step.